So today our topic is the book selection. We have several people with us to kind of enlighten us on how we do that. Thank you so much for being here on time.
Absolutely.
Very good.
So I am Michelle Jarrett. I'm the library supervisor for the district.
I get to put a face with a name.
Absolutely,
I've been talking with you so much on the phone.
And I am her supervisor. I'm Scott Clark. I'm the Director of Media and Instructional Technology.
Thank you.
And
So-
I'm Pete Thorne, Chief Information Officer.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take the lead, and Mr. Clark and Mr. Thorne will fill in, pop in whenever they see fit. So I have a presentation for you all, and I'll kind of start with the purpose of our school libraries. And we kind of have a three-pronged purpose, and this is across the nation. And their first purpose is, of course, to support the curriculum. Their second purpose is to provide access to a variety of materials for our students, and that's pretty much self-selection. We know that often our students do not have access to a print-rich environment in their homes, and they don't have access to a public library where they live. So for a lot of our students, the first place they have access to books is at their school when they either go to preschool or when they go to kindergarten. And then our third purpose is, of course, to provide instruction. So I'm going to kind of go through my notes here. And then our media specialists in Osceola County, they're amazing. I can't say enough incredible things about them. They have good evening or afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. How are you? I'm Michelle Jarrett. We've met before. Hello. So they not only do they teach classes, but they promote literacy. They're interventionists. They weed, inventory, and manage and repair books. They provide resources. They teach digital literacy. They plan and co-teach lessons with teachers. They select and purchase our books, which is our main purpose today. But they also serve as testing coordinators, textbook coordinators, and other duties as assigned, which is a very long list of other duties. And it sort of depends on the
Let me
year.
just stop you,
Yes,
because now I
ma'am.
have a quorum.
Sure.
Dr. Pace is joining us online, so I wanted to make sure that we started the meeting on time, but I don't know that we need to do this, but I'm being told that we do, so we can just vote to allow her to join virtually if we have any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Melendez, a second by Mr. Bass. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you,
I apologize
absolutely.
for that.
Absolutely. So in addition to those typical media specialist roles, they also do things like recess duty, lunch duty, substitute teaching, yearbook, morning announcements, MTSS, social media, web pages, so many different things. But obviously, their first priority is always our students.
Oh, that's one person?
Yeah, exactly.
As a former principal, I will say the library, you try to make that be the heart of your school. And I mean, the children, we want them to be wanting to come to the media center.
So we're going to talk today about their role of collection management, which is making sure that they're providing the best age-appropriate books to our students. And that is the selection and purchasing of books. So their first step that they do is analyze the collection. And when we analyze the collection, they're taking a look at what kind of books do we already have? What is the age of the books? What type of books? Are they fiction? Are they nonfiction? Are they graphic novels? Are they, encyclopedias, which we don't really use anymore because we have online resources, but some schools sometimes have them. What is the diversity of the books? What kind of characters do they sound and act like the students in my school? That sort of thing. And can the students in my school identify with the characters that are in these books? And do they support the curriculum needs and standards? So they take a look at all of that through something that we have. There's several different sources, but we use Destiny Resource Management as the management for our library collection. And there's a tool in there called Tidal Wave. So they upload their collection to that, and then it analyzes them and tells them the age of their collection and all of those things in their collection, how old things are, if your computer books are too old versus your history books, that sort of thing. So after they do that, they go to the second step, which is to actually write a collection development plan. So they're going to write this every single year, and we actually instituted this in 2016. Mr. Clark and I started in 2015, and so from that point on, we started to say we really wanted our media specialists to not only analyze their collection, but really make a plan of how am I going to move forward with my collection and making sure we have the best books for our students.
It requires them to become familiar with what's there is there an area that we're lacking certain kind of books that will address the desires of certain students? And that's where Michelle has come in so well from her past media experiences. We put this together expecting a collection development plan, and she's going to go through those steps of what the media specialists do.
Yes.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely, please
Yep,
do, please do.
anytime.
Anytime, interrupt me.
I'm assuming that the collection development plan will go over how you decide that diversity piece of it? Okay, so
Yep,
I'll
absolutely.
go after.
So the first thing they do is they do a purpose statement. So why am I writing this plan? And we actually have a template for the whole district. So I write one for the district as a whole, and then each school writes theirs for their school based on their school specifically. So OXA's is going to look different because they're an art school, which is going to look different from Neo City, which is going to look different from Gateway because they're an IB school. So everyone's going to look different based on their population and the focus of their school.
It kind of reflects the difference, like we have the district strategic plan, and then each school has theirs.
Yeah.
Same thing as how we do our collection
You guys
development
approve
plans.
those school site plans?
We do, yes. So then they write a background statement, what's the mission or the focus of the school, and who's responsible, which is usually the librarian and the district, and then the mission goals of the school, which is going to be different for every school. And then the target audience, which is, going to be the students, the community, the SAC committee, those sort of things. And then the budgeting and the funding. Typically, the funding is going to come from instructional materials. We average anywhere from $4 to $5 per student. Some schools give them additional funding, some schools don't. It depends on the type of school or what their additional budget allocations look like, but they always get that money from instructional materials.
So there's no state categorical specific for libraries?
It's a portion out of instructional materials that's given directly for school libraries, but nothing else.
And we partner with curriculum, and the state actually determines what that level is going to be most of the time, and then we get part of that money, and it gets distributed then to the schools. So that's one amount of money that they're guaranteed to have. As Michelle said, sometimes the school may have something in their budget, maybe they'll have money that comes from a PTO, it could just be depending on what their desire or mission is.
And then they typically do book fairs, types of things for additional funds.
That's the other thing.
So most of it comes from a state categorical under instructional.
Yes, ma'am.
That is then allocated specifically to media center.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And does it come to the district, or does it go to each individual school?
It comes to the district, and then we distribute it out to the schools after they write their plan.
We do that based on their student numbers at the schools.
So Part G of their collection development plan is how they choose their books, and I'll show you this. So that's coming up next,
Do you
but
get any E-rate money? Does
They
E-rate
don't.
money still exist? or-
that's,
E-rate money comes in, but that's mostly for your phones and your networking and all that. It does not go, it goes
Technology.
toward technology.
Because that's because libraries now aren't just books anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're tablets or the computers in there. Is there any E-rate money filtering its way into
The
the?
federal government is considering doing a thing where, like, if you end up having like a bookmobile that goes around and providing maybe the internet on that, it's not necessarily the books, but so some of that kind of thing, they'll work on the connectivity is really what they work on.
so they're including their collection analysis in this report that they're completing. And then they're going through, they're adding the selection aids. So this is what aids they're using to decide what books they're going to buy. And then they're including, and I'll go back to I, which is the selection aids, and then what criteria they're using to weed, which is a weird term for libraries, but what criteria they use for removing books, and then whether or not they accept gifts, which gifts can be a thing because lots of people don't want to get rid of books, and so they want to give them to our school libraries, but they're not always age appropriate, nor are they within the time frame of when we'd want published books, because we try to keep the age of our collection within 10 to 15 years so that we're providing the best books for our students. Instead of always keeping the old things, we try to maintain a current collection, which is where it goes back to weeding.
So, but I'm assuming that that's different, for example, than instructional materials that are used in like English class. Like,
Correct.
you're not going to see The Catcher in the Rye is not current, even though it was written, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then how we're going to replace things. And then if there's any special collection, so if a school is an art school, they're going to have a different collection for arts. If it's a STEAM school, that sort of thing, if there's any sort of special collection for them. And then
Are you
we,
going to get into, you mentioned the age appropriateness, are you going to get into the definitions? of
absolutely,
district?
absolutely, I have that in here, absolutely. And then the school board rules and challenge information is also always included in that challenge plan. And then their action plan. What are they going to do for the next 5 years? Where will they be weeding? Where will they be eliminating? So let's say they're going to take a look at their graphic novels this year. They're going to get rid of the old and replace it with new, so that every 5 years they're going through their entire collection so that they're maintaining a high-quality, age-appropriate collection every 5 years. So selection aids, these are peer-reviewed journals and reputable sources. And this is actually something that's included in the new House Bill 1467, that it does say that we must be accessing and using peer-reviewed sources when we're choosing our collections. So, and this goes back to, when they were writing House Bill 1467, they took a look at what we were doing in Osceola County to see, they were looking at processes that were working, and they referred back to our process here in Osceola County because they knew that it was a process that was working. So reputable sources are very important when you're looking at age appropriateness, what kids are reading, what is being published, what is being recommended for. And so these are just some of the sources that are being recommended for school librarians for what they're choosing for libraries. So for example, School Library Journal, which I have some samples of that, if you guys want to take a look at that. I have, and then one is School Connection, School Library Connection, Book List, Kirkus, and when you get this PowerPoint, these are all links, so you can check those out online.
So this is one of your
This
resources?
is one of mine, yes, but we actually just purchased a digital resource for this through something called Flipster, so that every librarian in the county will have access to use this for when they're curating their collection. We got Flipster, and we got Book List, which comes from ALA, and we got Book Links, I think, from ALA. And then School Library Connection, we just subscribe to as well for all of the library media specialists. So, and then YALSA, which is the Young Adult Library Service Association, gives us book recommendations, as well as the We Need Diverse Books website. So that specifically recommends things for diverse populations to make sure that we're making sure that we are exposing all of our students to both windows and mirrors, making sure that the books look like our students and also don't look like our students, so that they're seeing, everybody who looks and doesn't look like them.
I love that term.
The windows and mirrors,
Yeah,
I do too.
love that.
It's such a wonderful way to look at it. So this is what our media specialists are looking at when they're curating their collections, when they're looking at what they're going to buy. So the next steps, so they write their plan, and then they submit that plan to their principal. Their principal signs it. So the principal reads it and signs it. Then they submit it to us. I read it and sign it. After that, then we release the funds for purchasing. So nothing, we don't even release the money till they have written a plan and said, this is how we're going to spend our money. Then they start curating their lists based on those recommended peer-reviewed resources and websites that we've given them. They can also use things like Common Sense Media. They can go to Amazon, but that's not super reputable because anybody can write a review, as opposed to it being a peer-reviewed, which is a media specialist, someone with certification, someone who's a librarian, that sort of thing.
Do you have this presentation?
I do, yes, absolutely. And I shared it with everybody.
It's posted on the agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because all of those are links that you can go to.
Now, how big is that book list? Because if I'm ordering one book at a time, it's easier to kind of review it. Or do you buy them in trenches and you have 100 books that you're purchasing at one time?
They're purchasing 200 to 300 books at a time.
Bundles, and don't you have summer reading bundles and?
We don't typically purchase those. The librarians' big purchases are coming through their instructional materials money. So they're doing all of these steps before they're doing their purchasing and going through the reviews and going through magazines and spending the time to have to look through each of those things.
But some more bought in bundles.
Some, for other purposes, sometimes they buy in bundles, whether it's for summer reading and, a vendor has been reached out to, and they say, okay, we're trying to get some books for summer reading, can you send us a, collection,
I guess
that
my
sort of
point
thing.
with that is how much time do we have to review it? So if a librarian gives you a trench of, say, 500 books, is it getting approved the next day? Or is the next level of approval have enough time to be able to kind of look through that entire collection and say?
So that's a good question. When I do it, so after the media specialists approve their book lists, they come to us. After it's planned, I actually look through the lists and I compare it to their collection development plan. So if in their plan, they say, I'm really going to concentrate on my graphic novels this year. I'm looking through their book list to see, like, what's their percentage of graphic novels? Are they purchasing a lot of graphic novels? And then I kind of put my rubber stamp on it. Do I have time to read every book that every media specialist is purchasing? Of course not. So every person in that staff has to do their due diligence. And does that always work? It doesn't, because no one has the time to do that. But we have some other steps in place to fix that, and I'll show you kind of what that's looked like with a specific example. Given all of the extra duties that a lot of us have had, yeah, sometimes things happen. And that is where our challenge or reconsideration policy comes in, which is, sort of that system of checks and balances.
I see what you're saying, so it's defined to do that, because it's never going to be perfect at the beginning.
Sure.
That's why you have a formal appeals process in place.
Exactly.
If it does fall through the crack, it's not like, hey, it happened
Right.
inadvertently. We'll double check it against the standard to make sure.
And the media specialists come together normally monthly. We have a PLC for them, and sometimes they'll even talk about some of the titles they've ordered and for their school or ones that they may have concern. So they can meet and discuss those
Exactly.
items as
And
well.
when their books come in, they always try to peruse through them and kind of say, looking at the titles or looking, kind of say, should I have bought this? Should I have not? Maybe this isn't the right book. And I have had media specialists say, I shouldn't have bought this. What should I do? We'll call the vendor, try to send it back, those type of things, because that's not a book that they should have purchased, and, that sort of thing. And again, sometimes things happen. So
What
when
normally happens with that, in that situation?
we will call the vendor and they'll take it back and we'll get a credit for it, or they'll get a different
But
book.
they do take them back?
Yes, they do. So when they're curating their lists and their action plan, they're taking a look at what books are needed to replace what's damaged, what's aged, what are the curriculum needs, what are the needs of the student population, and what requests have the students and staff had.
There may be some of those books that are really popular, so they'll order additional ones, things like that,
Sure.
based on what those student and teacher needs may be as well.
Or like your Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or it's not Captain Underpants anymore, it's
Dogman.
Dogman, thank you.
I
Dogman
got a
is
little
always damaged, and so you're always replacing Dogman.
It's the
So,
Flipperama, so you
yes,
gotta make 'em
and they
fit and
tend
make sure
to
they're
try to purchase those, there's some books that they can buy from when they buy them from a book company, they'll get them, they're called Follett Bound or Back and Bound or Permabound, and if they start to fall apart, they will replace those. And so we try to purchase them from those type of companies because we know they're going to be so heavily used that they will, replace them when they fall apart.
If you don't have your own personal kids and you want to know what's most popular, sit in a media center for a day and you'll hear when the kids come in, because they'll probably ask for it as soon as they come in the door.
Yeah, exactly. So we have been asked by leadership and the board to take a look at the guidelines for books with mature content. And this has been different for every school in the district because every school population is different. But the media specialists met back in April and really started to take a look at some guidelines that every school would follow. So I want to share this with you. This is not, this is still evolving in the sense that the work is not done at the school level yet because we just haven't had the time yet. They're off for summer. We're gathering the titles as we continue to delve into their collections. Each school has anywhere from 8,000 to 13 or 14,000 titles in the collection. So we can't do all the work at once, but they are diligently working through their collections to figure out what titles need to be weeded and which ones need to be labeled as mature. Media specialists definitely have the authority to determine what can be weeded in their collection. So we talk about that reconsideration policy. And the media specialist is the professional in their building. So they're going to be able to say, you know what, that shouldn't have been bought. That doesn't meet statute. That doesn't follow our age-appropriate policies in our building. So I'm not going to put that out on my shelf. Or I'm going to make the decision that that isn't appropriate for the students in my school. So they can decide to weed that book. If they decide not to weed that book, and then someone else says, I don't think that book's appropriate, that's where that reconsideration policy comes in play. And I'll give you an example of someplace where that happened. But for elementary, our mature guidelines that have been established at this point are that books will be labeled mature when they're read in context and in their entirety, when they contain graphic drug use, graphic depictions of violence, excessive profanity, and graphic sex or nudity. Currently, we have not found any mature books at the elementary level. That is not something that is purchased at the elementary level. Can I see this, Maxine, for a minute? And you'll see, and this is what we see when we're purchasing books from any kind of book jobber, and you'll see in the back of, these are the kind of professional resources that we use, you'll see recommendations in the book review for like an age range. So like this book review says middle school, grades 7 and up, grades 8 and up, grades 9 and up. They're sticking pretty firm to what these recommended age ranges are. Sometimes there are mistakes, and I'll show you an example of that. But if it says for grades 4 to 6, they're going to say that's appropriate for elementary school because I have fourth graders in my elementary school. If it says it's recommended for grades 7 and up, and I'll show you middle school. So middle school tends to be our tough place because you have sixth graders who come in at 11 years old or sometimes 10 years old, depending on if they came from another state, and they go all the way up to 15 years old, again, depending on where they come from. I was a middle school librarian for almost 15 years. I always had a separate mature 8th grade area that I only let my 8th graders have, or you had to have a parent note. I mean, it's different for every school, but we're developing guidelines that the whole district will follow because middle school is just so hard. Something that 6th graders wouldn't have access to, but would be different if a book was recommended for 8th grade and up, only 8th graders would have access to that. And that is, those books would be labeled mature when they're read in context and in their entirety. They have graphic drug use, graphic depictions of violence, implied sexual encounters or contact, and the reviews are recommended for grades 8 and up or young adults. So we are saying young adult is going to be that's 8th grade and up because they are young adult students.
These are the books that are recommended for mature? Yes, labeled
Yes,
mature.
yes. So an example of that would be something like The Hunger Games. That is graphic depictions of violence. And so that's recommended for 8 and up sometimes, or 9 and up. If it's in a school, it's going to be labeled mature at this point.
So how do you vet, I'm just going through, and I'm
Sure.
listening to what you're saying, but I'm just glancing through the reviews on some of these books and and I would have a hard time with some of them, given the comments that we've been receiving from the public. One in particular, and I'm just using this just an example, it's called Cram This Book, so you know WTF is going on in the world today.
What's it recommended for?
Well, middle to high school, but we know what that means. And when you read the summary of it, the summary is, the cram is a newsletter in the aftermath of the 2016 election. So in just looking at that, it makes me feel like it's going to be pushing an agenda in a certain direction. I don't care what side you're on, but I don't know that it's our position to be. And it says the verdict, a super helpful resource for social studies classes and catching up on social, economic, or political events. I would hope that we would read that book and vet that book in a way.
So what I would say the media specialist probably would do is go get 2 or 3 other reviews from the other sources. They wouldn't use just one review.
That's why when you saw that one slide that we have several different ones, and you can compare between them. Some of them may have a contradiction in what age
They
it's
do,
for.
yeah.
They'll rate it differently, just like, any others.
So I understand the mature, what you're vetting them as based on like the book as a whole, but this is a particular subject area, so it doesn't necessarily cover any of that. But to address your issue with that particular book and books like them, those are social issues. I may have a different parenting style perhaps than Mr.
Right.
Bass does.
Absolutely, I get
And-
it.
No,
I understand. Okay.
let me finish.
All right.
So I wouldn't have an issue with my daughter reading it, but I respect your position on whether or not you would like your child to read that book. So I know that we put something in place to kind of give parents an option. Is that has already been put into place where one of these books, for example, could be labeled as you need special permission, or how do we kind of deal with that specific issue?
So we don't have topics such as social topics
Yeah.
labeled as mature content. That would be a conversation between parents and their children.
Okay.
I can tell you from that Media Center advisory survey that went out in the spring, as all of our conversations started, we had 48 responses to that survey. 5 of them were from private charter or people outside the county. So we had 43 legit student responses or parent responses. Of those responses, 1 parent said no access for their child. 11 said limited, go ahead.
That was a global no access.
Correct.
Okay.
It was an elementary student with no library access at all.
Okay.
11 parents said limited access for their students. That meant no access to mature content. And 31 parents said unlimited access to the school library.
Okay.
So you don't think that that's a valid representation of what the community wants, though, right? Because what that is very clearly, it's been publicized here by the district what's going on. And so now you're going to have the people who would be okay with their child reading that specific book that Robert just pointed out, answering that survey specifically to go in there and put, I want full access, because they're taking advantage of the publicized
Would
process,
other
right?
parents not have the
So-
same option? Was
Hold
it
on,
limited to?
hold on, Teresa. So it's not a really fair representation, because it's not, number one, it's not statistically valid with 40 responses.
I don't know if it is or it isn't. I think
I
it'll
do.
be clear.
I know it's not, because
I
it's
think
40
it will be
responses
more
doesn't give you a
clear.
doesn't give you a valid statistical.
But I think it will be
model
more
based on-
clear when we do the process for the school year next year, when every parent has the option during enrollment.
Maybe. But, so let me move on to something else. So one of the things that you mentioned were these peer-reviewed things, peer-reviewed, I guess, organization, right, that you used from. So, I mean, obviously, this is a pretty important issue, because even in the magazine that I randomly is given, there's talking about these picks being controversial, right? So I thought that that was a great example, because that's purely a political thing, right? So when you have parents that are concerned that why are we providing our kids with political agenda-driven things, and here's one that's even worse. A Guide to Crushing Girl Hoop Feminist AF, right? So that's for elementary school. Seems like a pretty complicated topic for an elementary school child to understand, right?
But that's assuming our media specialists have purchased that.
Well, here's one
But
that
they
I...
haven't.
Right, so here's one that I know that we do have in our libraries. It's an elementary school book. I think it's called Awkward. There was also another one, I may be confusing names. It is at our schools, and it has 2 children kissing or making out. So, and it's for elementary school. So that would be kind of even more, why, right? That's, to me, that's a problem, number one, right, already. I think that why are we providing them with maybe not what's sexually explicit content, but with romantic content that doesn't really, I mean, there's no purpose in terms of education. The state just told us that we were doing a horrible job at teaching our kids reading, and what we're doing is, instead of using things that are actually educational based or fulfilling their minds educationally, we're providing them with kids making out in our books. And to me, that's, it's related, right? So another one is, what's in here.
Can I interject real quick? We'd have to look at that book and determine what the full content of that book is.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad that you brought that up, because here's the thing. So in a movie, when you go to a movie, right, if they show one scene of nudity in a 2-hour movie, then that movie gets an R rating, right? So why are we allowing 2 hours of book, right, even though there's one scene of nudity, to bypass the rating process to get it into the books? It seems like the intention is to get these books into the schools instead of actually
The intention by
reviewing
whom?
by whomever, either, it doesn't matter, whichever level you choose. It could
No,
be
but the intention by whom? By me? By my media specialist?
by the media
By the-
specialist, or by
So-
you, or by the
So it's the
district, or by
intention of the
some...
media specialist to purchase books of people kissing? Or is the intention of the media specialist to purchase books to get kids read and to show kids that they love them and to teach kids to love literature? I'm just trying to
I don't know
figure
what
out
that has
what
to
it
do with my
is.
question necessarily, so...
I'm trying to figure out to whom.
I think it
Okay,
goes
so
to
let me explain.
content and context.
Hold on, Mr. Thorne. So here's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter who in the line. The fact is the kids are not buying their own books. They're being provided to the children. So when I say somebody has the intention, it doesn't have to be an intention to necessarily get this particular book, but the intention with the process of saying that when we're going to look at the context, okay, we're going to bypass something that most parents would not be okay with their kids reading, right? Then we're going to bypass it, so because the rest of the book is okay. So in a movie,
Now that we can make an assessment that most parents aren't okay with it.
I'm just
we
using an
don't
example,
have the
so she
data.
asked, so, okay, hold on. So, like I said, going back to the movie thing, right? If there's one scene of nudity, you get the rating R, right? So why wouldn't we do the same books? So if there's a page here, it's not about context, it's about a particular scene, and then the parents can judge for themselves whether they want their children knowing, because then that would be an honest rating. This book has nudity, or it has kids making out in it, you may not want your child to read this book, right?
Mr.
Regardless
Arguello,
of-
that's why the media specialist will look at multiple different kinds of journals and get that. If so, like we mentioned a while ago at the beginning, we're not going to just use that one. They would check at another. And that's not an intention.
But that's
The
a
intention-
review, right?
The
So-
intention is to get books where the kids are going to be interested in reading. At the very beginning, before we started, I think it was just a few of us in here, we mentioned the purpose of that was to try to get students to read.
Right.
The books that we have in the media center, there's two different sides to this. One of them is the instructional materials, and that's for teaching in a classroom. So for curriculum, they may order class sets of certain titles. Now, those books, I guarantee you, are going to meet, some of those expectations. In a library, it's more of a self-selection, so it's not, that's why it is open, and there is such a variety. We really are trying to do everything that we can to, because we don't want to get, books that we find unacceptable to a majority of the country. That's not our goal, all right? Understand that clearly.
But that's been achieved, right?
Very limited, if any. But, and then if you look at it, and then that's why we're going through the process. But the situation is this, in our next steps of the presentation, because I'd suggest that we move on, it's going to,
Something I wanna
and we'll
say.
take your question. Well, I apologize.
No, sure.
We're going to talk about if someone is not happy with the book, what we will do. And
I think we've talked a lot
we're
about
required by
that,
the state, we're required by the state, especially now in the House bill, they mention it. And that's where the great part is for us in Osceola, is they did take and look at our plans of what we do, just as part of that basis. Now, were we the only group they talked to? No. But we did have a system in place that can be, and follow that proper step, and we'll adhere to it and follow it. But
So here's the component that I would be okay with. If we had an overall, let's say that we had an overall, these are all the books that are in our schools, these are all the books, and this is all the content in those books. You can judge for yourself. But then we publicize that book to every single parent, so that every single parent in our community knows exactly the books that are being provided to the community. Because here's the philosophical debate, really. When it comes down to everything that we discuss comes down to one question. Who should be in control of the content that is provided to our kids? Is it the media specialist, right?
That's what
Is it
the
you
law
guys?
says right now.
Or is it the parent? Who should be?
The law says the media specialist will make a selection of what's in there. And that's coming from the DOE. And I will tell you, we have a process if a parent doesn't like it. And that's where we're going. I do want to turn to you,
Mr.
Mr. Melendez, because I
Melendez has a
didn't want to
question.
cut you off. I apologize.
And one thing I do appreciate about the guidelines for mature content, and I'm kind of glad that Mr. Bass brought that up, because it brought up a good point, because I know the Supreme Court case doesn't apply, but I can use some of the logic and use it myself. Since it doesn't really apply, it didn't apply either way. I don't like the idea of the topic being what gets scrutinized. Whether or not it's communism, whether or not it's whatever, I think it's also our goal part is education. They're supposed to see both sides and recognize, oh, communism's bad. But if you never read about communism, how do you know communism's bad? So I don't think it should ever be topic related. I think it should just be mature content. Is it drugs? Is it violence? Is it sexual content? Is the action of what's happening bad? So even white supremacy, let's hit the dark horse in the room. White supremacy technically is a topic. It existed. Should the kids not know about it? Yeah. Now, if they're hanging people and the act of hanging is graphic violence. But if somebody wants to talk about white supremacy, at the end of the day, this is part of education. People need to know what white supremacy was and why it's bad. But if it's super graphic and it shows hanging every other thing, the act of hanging, not the topic of white supremacy, is what we should be going after. And I just want to make sure that, I'm just one board member, but I just want to make sure that that's the line of demarcation when you guys are looking at the standards. It shouldn't be the topic. It could talk about gays. Oh, gays shouldn't be banned. No, we shouldn't be banning topics. We should talk about gays all day. But it's the act of excuse my language, but like penetration is bad, whether it's gay, straight, or not, whatever you want to call it. It's the act, the mature act that's being represented in the book that should be the standard guideline of whether or not it's appropriate and at what level it's appropriate. It shouldn't be the topic or the subject matter behind it. The subject matter doesn't like somebody or rub somebody the wrong way, that's their issue to deal with, and that's for them to talk to parents. But, education is about true education. People should be exposed to different subject matters. They shouldn't be subject to what's inappropriate acts or specific.
And that
And it should
was-
be balanced, right?
Sure, absolutely. And that was the conversation we had with the media specialists, and I actually have some of them here. The media specialists, when we were discussing the high school, because that's another one where, there's a lot of stuff there, when it describes the act as opposed to telling you the act happened, those are two different things. So, yes, they did this, or here's how they did it, are two different things. And so that's where we drew the line for mature content. There shouldn't be 3 pages describing the act of an act.
What about pictures?
Oh, I'm gonna get to that. I'll show you, because I know what you're referring to. So books will be labeled mature when in context and in their entirety, they contain realistic, intense, persistent, and extreme violence, drug abuse, and persistent and graphic nudity and activity that is sexual in nature. So that's what we believe would be mature content or would not be purchased because it violates statute. So, here's some things to remember.
May I
Yes,
ask,
ma'am.
sorry.
Absolutely.
You said labeled mature content and/or not purchased?
So-
Which one is it?
If it's a little bit of that, it would be labeled mature.
Got it.
If it crosses the line, it would be, we believe, we would not purchase it because it would violate statute.
Understood, thank you.
So some things to remember, for Osceola County, all of these procedures, except for the mature content label, have been in place since 2016. We have been a model across the state, and our procedures were cited with House Bill 1467. And when you get the link to this, I did cite the link to the bill. And all of our Osceola County School Library Media Centers are staffed with a certified school library media specialist. That is not the case across the state. And lots of counties are scrambling to get certified library media specialists in place, thanks to House Bill 1467, because 1467 says that a certified media specialist needs to purchase all of the library books in a school in addition to any books that are used in a book list.
That makes me
So
happy.
it makes me too. I'm very proud to be part of Osceola
Media
County
specialist.
because it has been something that has been a commitment. I have been here since 2000, and I have been a media specialist since 2004, and we have always had a media specialist in our schools, and I think that we should be very, very
And when I
proud of
first came to the
that.
district years ago, there was a media specialist and a media assistant. You had a couple
Yeah.
that would help with each, so that way you could overlook. The next point that Michelle's going to get to is the fact that the media specialists now, especially now that this House bill's in place, they've got to curate that collection. And the part that Michelle hits that's the most important is adding, but also removing. We do have books that need to be removed. If you have an old dated collection and you have too many books in there, the students won't see those that are the most. So it's really a fact that, and it's their responsibility now, and we've got to give them that opportunity.
Mr. Clark, is the weeding continuous or is it only during the summer?
It's continuous. So anytime they may see a book, and so I will also say this, we've had a lot of turnover recently. So if you inherit a collection, it's going to take you 3 to 5 years to find out what's on your library shelves. So you may not even know that a book is on the shelves. So if something's there that does not meet our standards, you might not know yet. But we're working on that process.
And it'll
Especially
take
if
them that
nobody
amount.
checks it out either. If nobody's checking it
Right.
out,
Correct.
it's staying on the
That's-
So,
shelf.
because you're only seeing what's circulating, exactly.
And it also helps you, it takes a little bit of time also to get to know your students, not just the collection, but what your students are going to want from that school
Absolutely.
as well.
In addition to that, if something was purchased in 2005, standards change, our students change, and so, it takes a little while. But it's our professional responsibility for every media specialist to continually curate their collection and weed things. So we know that things happen, and here's an example. Okay, So the media specialist finds a book in a journal or online, it's recommended, it wins awards. It is specified in their collection development plan that they want to meet the needs of their diverse learners, maybe their LGBTQ population. This book is peer-reviewed, and it's award-winning, all those things. But the book is genderqueer. It checks all of those things off. So they purchase the book. The book comes in. Whoops. There we
There you
go.
go.
The book comes in, but then the media specialists decide the book does not meet the needs of their population, their community standards, or their collection development plan. The media specialist can make two decisions. They can immediately take the book off the shelf and never put it on the shelf and send it back to the company. Or maybe they didn't take a good look at that book and they put it on the shelf because they didn't have time. It was testing. It was COVID. They were in the middle of teaching virtual and in person. And so they got all of their new books and they said, yay, my new books are here. I'm putting them on the shelves, and they went on with their day. But then they found out and they really took a look at what was in there. So the media specialist can weed the book, which is their professional responsibility, or they can leave it on the shelf and then a book can be challenged, which is part of our community standards, by the community itself. This is a perfect example of what happened in Osceola County. Genderqueer was purchased in between December of 2020 and March of 2021. So that book was purchased. It is an award-winning book by several different awards through ALA and through the New York Times and a couple other things. So students or media specialists said, of course I want an award-winning book. I'm going to purchase that book. It goes on the shelf. But once they realized what's in it, they really took a look at it and said, you know what? I don't think this book is going to meet the needs of my particular students. I'm going to make the professional decision to remove that book from our shelves. And so they made the decision to weed it and took it off the shelves. They took it off the shelf in October. It was actually never checked out by any students. I did have one media specialist decide to put it in a special collection behind her desk. It was still never checked out by a student. That media specialist left the district at spring break. In meeting with other media specialists and decisions that they made, we made the decision to remove it from that collection. It was never made available to students. Had it been on the regular shelf, the community could have gone through the process, and the community as a whole could have made the decision, because that's why we have that process in place, which is what we're going through right now with some of the other books.
How often does the community actually challenge the books? Not at board meetings, I mean through the process.
I have been in this county since 2004. I've been a media specialist since 2004. I have never had a challenge at my own school. Since I've been the supervisor since 2015, I've had 3 formal challenges, 2 at an elementary school and 1 at a middle school. The 2 elementary books, one was Big Nate, because the parent did not like the Yo Mama jokes. And the decision was made to keep the book on the shelf. The other book was called Redneck Counting Babies, because the parent was offended by the term redneck. And the decision was made to weed the book because it was actually an older book. And the third one was a book called, oh my goodness, the one where the meteor hits the earth and knocks it off of its axis. That's another name of that? Okay, anyway, I think the book was decided to be kept. And those were the only 3 in all of my experience. And I've never seen a book go to a district review.
Has there been an uptick since 2020 at all?
I've
Are those
never.
the only 3?
Yes, and nothing since 2020. I've never had a formal book challenge filled out.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
that doesn't necessarily, that doesn't have a lot of meaning to it, right? It means
But
that
it
for
does.
many years, the community wasn't paying attention to what's in our libraries. And then a book like Genderqueer comes out, and now all of a sudden you have parents that are concerned, a committee is created, and you realize that, well, maybe the process, it may be memorialized in 1467, but it may not be great, because at the same time, you have to question if anybody can say that genderqueer is appropriate for school-age children, then maybe that's not a great peer review source for books, right? Or for anything.
It's
So-
a theory, yes.
Right, so I would imagine that unless there's a lot of trust in the way that the processes are done, then you're going to see a lot more people either not be involved at all, not continue not to do it, but instead what they're going to do is take the most sacred, the most official form of protesting one of these books and coming to the board meeting as a member as a citizen of our community and speaking to all of their elected officials, right? And to our superintendent, which would trump a piece of paper from somebody filling out a report that doesn't want to go through the trouble of that process.
But I will say that through the House bill, and I know I heard our attorney even say that the expectation now is that we'll follow that House bill, and we're going to have that process followed where they fill out the documentation, I believe, is what I've heard Frank before, and we'll make sure that form is completely available to anybody and everybody, because we do want to hear their opinion, if they have that comment.
Then why complicate
And
it?
turn it in, because we're following the law, that's why.
Okay, so
But I actually
the
think.
genderqueer doesn't follow the law, right? There's a lot of books in our libraries right now which may not be, which may violate state statute, all right?
Gender
And certain-
isn't
even
in our
that
libraries, is
books-
that
It's not in
correct?
our libraries, and it
Right.
was.
Earlier?
it
Not
wasn't-
anymore, but it
wasn't
was.
checked out.
right,
But
but
the
it-
process for that works.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's checked out or not.
It
That's not the,
works.
that's not the
But it-
statute.
it
They
was
self-weeded it.
The
so,
process
yes.
worked.
Right, well, that's
I
my
think the
point
most
exactly. So we did it,
They
we
work.
weeded it, but now you're forcing the community, now the community can no longer weed it by making people aware. So let's say that John Doe comes to the meeting and says, Superintendent Pace, I have a really big problem with this book. My kid is in third grade, and this book has two children kissing in this book. Why is that appropriate in the third grade? And then Dr. Pace can't go to you and say, you know what, you should guys go read this book. Instead, what's going to happen is that you're going to say, oh, well, I'm sorry, go fill out the documentation. That's not the best service to
How difficult is
community.
the form? How big is it?
It's 7 questions, but they.
7 questions, should we
Actual,
include it here and put it in the back? Because I think the challenge that I'm having with this whole process is, it's a questionnaire. Fill it out. If it's difficult, then we'll put it over there. But it has to be done because that's the process. I don't know why it's
actually,
difficult.
what the
Copy is
best
here from now on, I
process
believe.
is,
Can we just put it over there? Can we
what
do
I would
that?
love to see is that when parents, what I would love to see is that when parents have something like that, I'd love to see them call the media specialist and have a conversation with them. Because that's actually where the best information and conversation happens, is when you start to have relationships with the people in your school building. When the parent would say, let me talk to that media specialist and see where they're coming from. See if they're the one who purchased the book. See why they purchased that book. Let's see what I can do to keep my kid safe and make sure that my kid is having access to the books that I want them to have access to, and have a relationship with the people in my child's building. That would be the best
I agree with you.
process.
Not only is that the best process, I think that that's exactly what this district needs.
I'd
The
love
problem
to see
is,
that.
here at this district, we have a problem where when parents do go to a local level, sometimes they don't feel like they're getting the service, and then they go up, and they go up, and they go up, and they go up, and they feel like they're not being heard, right? So then they end up coming here to this room, right, where for sure they're going to be heard. It may not be dealt with any differently.
Well, I know.
So it's important to keep in mind that in the end, no matter how fancy we get, our boss is the people who decide what method they're going to use, how they approach us, right, when they approach us, and which one of us they approach.
At the core, school librarians are about books, kids, and relationships with families. And so I can tell you that if someone calls one of my people, they're going to talk to that parent.
And if they do that form, it's going to get to that media
gonna get
specialist.
taken care of.
Give the media specialist a chance.
Give them the benefit of the doubt.
Because I'm telling you,
I'm fine with that.
They'll do their
Is the
job.
form electronic
And I know
as
Frank-
well?
I'm fine with that.
We have it here. Is it also electronic, an electronic form? Yes.
So here's my frustration when you're talking about about going to the media specialist. Media specialists are paying, they know what this discussion is happening, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So when all those parents come and they start reading excerpts and they start saying that, they might as well be talking to you guys. Now that you guys either take action or you take lack of action, that says something as well, right? So I would consider, for you guys, all those parents who have made statements here, maybe go back, watch the video, listen to what they've said, and take it as if they've gone to each school and they've spoken with you guys
The point
personally.
I'm going to make, Mr. Aguirre, Frank, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
All I'm going to tell you is if they read that book in the entirety and they answer those questions, they're going to have a better understanding of that book. And I'm going to tell you right now, there are some that they'll pull. They will. But the point that Michelle made earlier is nobody's given the system a chance. And if you give that system a chance and give it to the media specialists and do that, I'm telling you, we will follow. But
I
I'll
think
turn to you, Frank.
there's one thing that everybody hates about the DMV, right? And it's a sense of bureaucracy, which is overwhelming.
Well,
Nobody wants that. What they want is to be able to communicate with the people that they elect in most cases, or when they come up here, and this is the most official thing. The document that you guys are requiring is not more official than a parent coming here, a member of the community coming here, and addressing their elected officials and their superintendent and saying, you know what, I'm exposed to this, I want this. That should be the most official act that they can take. And so, then maybe it would be upon me, if there's a member of my district or somebody comes to me and they say, Arguello, you know what, I really don't like this book, then maybe from now on, I'll make that statement to the community. Come to me with your book complaints. I'll fill out every form and I'll send the form down the pole and we'll see what happens. But in the end, number one, if I were a professional, and if I were in the kitchen staff, okay, or if I were in any staff, any job in this county, and somebody comes here, a parent comes here, I would take it as if that parent was speaking to me. I think that that's
I will
appropriate.
say this for the record. Mr. Melendez, I'm sorry. Did you have something to say?
Just one thing, because I like your idea of having the parent themselves fill out the form and have it there. But one thing I would like to see with the form, because I think when I read it, it wasn't as clear as yours, where it showed what was
I do
the
like that.
standard for
Yep.
elementary school, middle school, and with that. So when they fill out the form, it's like they know the rules of the game.
Yep.
Because one thing I don't want is people to perceive that, you know what, they like this book better than other, or like you're kind of playing favorites, or this principle is being harder on a standard. I think that with that questionnaire needs to be like a standard sheet attached to it and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. And so that way, if it ever does get weeded, they don't feel like they were targeting that parent, that they felt like, hey, we followed a process and this is the standard, and it's the same standard for everybody.
know
I
Mr.
agree with
Kruppenbacher's
that.
been trying to speak for one.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I agree with what you said. I like the fact that you have the standard ahead of time so people know what the standard is. But I would just say, and I don't typically say things for the record, but I will in this case, the bureaucracy is what protects people. So just because one parent doesn't approve of a book for X or Y reason doesn't mean that 90% of them don't. And so that is the reason why I think that it is important that we follow the process, because we are not just speaking for one parent or five, we're speaking for 68,000 times two, right? We're speaking for all parents. And so I personally think that the bureaucracy is important in this particular case, because we are not just protecting or speaking for one parent. We represent all parents in the entire community. Mr. Kroppenbacher?
So we don't lose form over substance. My advice has been, if somebody brings to the attention of the principal or the librarian a concern about a book, and they're either not capable of filling out the form or whatever, we're going to take the time to look at the book, even if we don't get the thing. We're not going to, I think the point is, we're not going to ignore the response. We'll take a quick look at it. We may go say to the parent, we've looked at it, we need you to fill out this form now. But we're not going to just wait for the form, because we could have a week of the wrong book around students. And I think that's the important training we're going to put in everybody, that practically know a red flag's been raised in front of you.
And how will that be documented if the
Right,
parent isn't filling out
document
the
it.
form?
If the parent's not filling out the form, you fill it out and say, this parent told me this, and take a look at the book. And if there's cause to act, fine. If there isn't, the worst thing in the world is they tell a principal, it's a busy day, they tell the librarian, it's busy. Nobody does anything, and candidly, they think, well, why do I have to fill out the form? Or they're not capable, and there are people like that.
And the other good
And then
thing
they
about-
show up here saying, I got a problem with this book, and I've told X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z look like they intentionally just ignored it. So I have urged that we train everyone with, if you get that red flag, go independently look at the book. You can get the form executed later, but it's like if somebody reports child abuse, against the teacher, you really gotta step in at that moment. because you can't wait
And I
for-
think, Mr. Kuttenberger, what you're saying is exactly what Michelle was saying to Mr. Arguello. Just let
That's what
the
I'm
media
saying.
specialist
Yeah,
know.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
reiterate
Yeah.
that that's an important component to it. We just aren't gonna ignore if a parent says, I have a concern.
My only concern with that, I will say, is if someone comes in and says, I don't like this book because it has two gay characters in it, or it has, whatever, like, I think we have to be careful that there's a legitimate, and I'm not using the word legitimate right.
I
I
don't
want
think
us to
that
be
we should be
careful
the
that we're
judge.
not.
Let me interrupt
Well,
you.
the community, that's what the form is for. So the
Guidelines from
community.
what is the judge, it's
Right.
not just like
That's-
random, I don't
the
like
form
this
is so a
book.
committee
My point
meets.
is that trying to be the decider of legitimacy, or trying to say that, well, you know what, I've heard your complaint, and I'm going to discount it because I
You know what?
disagree
Yeah,
with
there's
you.
no
We have the
discounting.
guidelines right there. It's in
Okay,
statute.
relax, Terry. I'm
Don't
just-
say that.
relax.
Don't say it. I
I'm
get
just
it. It's a
saying.
talking
What
point
would you
for
say?
you.
How-
It's not
One
a talking
second.
point. What it is
One
I
second.
was speaking, and I'm taking a comment,
I
and now
was
you're
speaking as
fighting
well.
your
Guys,
dialogue.
I get it. Cameras, no. I'm going to make my point, okay? I get it that you have
I
a
think that
talking
you're
point,
correct.
that I'm
Exactly,
emotional.
that's right. There's a liability
You
issue.
continue to interrupt me, right, on purpose because you have an audience. Where was that dude that was at the other meetings that was nice, quiet, and cooperative? I want that guy back, right? Exactly.
Terry, you're
Let
on
me
camera, and
finish.
you're still not behaving
Let me
like a
finish.
professional right now.
I know, I got it. Your talking points are taken. You need your talking points, and I'm emotional. And I am emotional about this because I am not just representing a little bit of people. I'm representing the entire district, okay?
Why
We
would
have the
I would appreciate if
guidelines.
you did that professionally.
We have-
Because my concern is
No
valid.
one is
and my
being
concern is valid.
unprofessional. If you say I'm unprofessional, it doesn't make it true. Being passionate and being unprofessional are two different things, okay?
Okay, well, you're doing both
We
things
have
right
the
now.
guidelines right there. That is the reason they exist. So I think that that is the reason why we have to follow the process. The guideline is there. That's all I wanted to
The problem
say.
is what Frank was just
Wait,
highlighting
let me
is that
interrupt
there's.
both of you
go
guys.
ahead.
You guys are going at it. Let me ask a legit question again, a substantive question. One concern that I have about somebody not filling out the form, because I did see it in the past, people were using just collection of books and saying, hey, challenge this.
Correct.
When I like to know is, it's an actual book that's in our collection, like that it's not legit as far as whether or not the concern is legit, whether or not the book is legitimately in our collection. So if somebody says, hey, I fill out the book because I read it at Denjon Middle School, what I don't want is a bunch of people just saying, oh, there's a bunch of books I don't like. Are they even in our books? So here we are triggering an investigation
They
on
can
something
do a
that's not even
search
in our
out in the
collection.
public and say, oh,
And
these
they
are
have.
the top 50 books
Correct,
that are
and
challenged.
that's what I want to try to avoid.
So
I don't
all the
want-
books,
so-
Julius-
So John says, Frank, I don't want to, if it's a legit book that's in our collection, I want us to always investigate.
So-
I don't want to investigate phantom books that may or may
That
not
don't
exist
exist.
in our.
All the books that were mentioned at these meetings were checked in the database to make sure. That's how they knew that genderqueer was here, even though we were told that it wasn't here, that it was here at some point, because it's in the record, and they had to do a.
But if
public
they fill,
record.
but if they filled out a form though, John, to that respect, though, in true, all due respect, if they fill out a form and said, hey, I found genderqueer at this, there wouldn't be none of that, because it'd be there, they've identified it, so there'd be no conspiracy.
They
there'd be
already
no
know, because there's a
potential.
database that the public can
You
search.
don't have to
that-
check a
I know
database if
that.
you fill out the form, that's the whole point of filling out the form.
That's how you know it's in this
identify where it's at.
library, right? So if somebody reads the book and they look in the database and they say, oh, well, it's at my school, it's at Denjon. If this book is going to harm my child at Denjon, it will also harm somebody else's child at Horizon. So when you look at the database, because the parents will come and they say, listen, I read this book, I don't like this book, it's in 5 schools.
Now, how did they read that book? How'd they acquire that
I
book?
can't guarantee you.
I mean, that's-
Everybody has
that's-
read
That's what I'm
it.
trying to say,
All the time.
that's my point, they just can't
But I'm
randomly
saying
pick up
this,
books out of thin
first
air and
of
just
all,
accuse it.
Nobody or employees should decide independently, like
Yes.
we don't think, because that's going to just expose them to the attack. We all agree a form is going to get filled out. It may get filled out the minute the person complains, and hopefully, if they complain, the principal would have the forms with them and say, let's fill this out, and they would identify what in the book don't you like, meaning we're not going to start just wholesale reading books because you named 10 books type thing. And then you'll go from there. So ultimately, there's going to be a record. The protection of the employee and the public is, one, that record, but two, that we act on the fact somebody's told us about it, and we document what we've done, and then everybody's protected.
So as we were preparing for this workshop, the thing was to go through the collection development plan, just so you get an idea of how we pulled the plans together. And then the next part is just going to re-review just that reconsideration process. And that's where I think we're at now is, if the challenge is there, what is that? So we'll proceed with the presentation.
I have a quick question. So as part of the House bill, there's professional development and training. I wanted to touch on what Mr. Kuppenbacher said. That professional development and training is mirrored after some of the training that we've had in this district.
No.
It is not.
It is
Okay.
not. It is a new training that will be provided by the Department of Education. It will not be provided until January 1. And so we are not to do any purchasing until that training, for libraries, until that training is provided.
Thank you. I wanted
I
to
do
get
know,
clarity on that.
they're hoping that the state moves a little quicker than January, but at this current moment, I think in that listing, John may know better than I do, I think it's listed as that's the date that they put on theirs.
It's January 1.
January 1 of 2023.
So when we do get a request for reconsideration of a library material, meaning a community member has expressed concern, and that can be by any parent, guardian, employee of the district, or a resident of Osceola County. They can object. It goes to the principal. It must be made in writing on the form. An oral complaint is not sufficient, and this is in our guidelines. These are posted on the Media and Instructional Technology website. The principal forwards a copy to our department, and we notify the superintendent. And then the challenge at this point only applies to the school at which the challenge originates. And at that time, the book is not available to students. Within 30 days, the principal calls a meeting of the School Library Media Advisory Committee. That committee includes administrator, media specialists, teachers, and parents who do not work at the school, and students as appropriate, especially at the high school level. The principal, they notify us at the MITD or Mr. Clark that committee meeting is happening. If they need additional copies, they let us know. We get them from other schools, and then they complete the request for reconsideration, they receive a copy of the complaint, and they read the book in its entirety. If there's any professional reviews, the committee is given all of the reviews that can be located from all the sites that are available. At that time, the standards that we have are used, the standards that they use to determine if that book stays on the shelf are the age of the children who normally could be expected to have access to that material, the educational purpose for that material, the degree to which the instructional and library material would be supplemented and explained by mature classroom instruction as part of normal instruction, and the consideration of a broad racial, ethnic, socioeconomical, and cultural diversity of the children who would have access to that material.
And I think this was actually on the form itself, right, on page 6. If we can add to that, the standards that you showed on the other side, because this didn't break down what was appropriate for elementary school, middle school, and high school. So if you can supplement these standards, because this is what people are reading in the public. They don't read that slide that I really like.
Thank you.
So if you
As
can add
our
that to it.
book committee has started meeting, we did have our first meeting yesterday for one of our books under the review committee. We have seen some things with the form that the committee believes needs to be adjusted, so they'll definitely be making that recommendation at the end of that process. Just some things that were a little confusing and need to be clarified. So then they have 30 days to meet and give their decision to the principal, and then we're notified, and then the petitioner can be present to make a verbal or written statement to that committee. And then the committee gives their recommendation on the specific form, and then the principal notifies the petitioner.
How many days?
30 days.
How many days does the principal have to respond to the recommendation? Because I'm concerned,
It just says immediately.
yeah, I think you want to tie down
Within
some
24 hours or-
date, 48 hours, 72, because business hours, because
Sure.
if you don't, you inadvertently,
Immediately.
they're so busy,
Sure.
you know.
It might be Friday afternoon, right?
Yeah,
Sure,
I would
absolutely.
say within 24 or 72
Because he's
business
just pulling it
hours.
for review.
Well, this is after he's.
After
been
he's been
notified by the
notified.
committee.
After he's been notified, then he pulls it, and then it goes to the review.
No,
This is
You're
after-
talking about the beginning, Mr. Bass.
My
Where he's
apologies.
asking us now is at the end, and the committee's made the decision how quickly.
Oh, my
does he have to-
apologies, I thought you
Right,
meant, I was
they're
talking about
given
the
a
beginning.
recommendation.
Okay.
I'd
My
say
apologies.
72 hours.
I think
So
that-
they have plenty of time.
Right.
It's not.
They got to
they're not
look,
rushed.
they got to, maybe want to talk to the district,
Find out on a
whatever.
Friday, you know, that.
That's, I think you give them 72 hours, but you got to tell them a time frame because some people will expect to have it that week, others
Okay.
will be fine if it goes.
Okay, no problem.
We'll bring that back to you.
Yep, absolutely. So if they recommend, whoops, hello. Wow, I just went really far there. Let's go back. All right. If the committee recommends that the book be removed, it will be sent to the director of MITD with the accompanying paperwork. If they decide it stays, the petitioner may appeal to, in writing within 10 days of that recommendation to the director of the
After they've
MITD.
received that,
Yes. Then the director of MITD has 20 days to organize a meeting of the district review committee. They notify the superintendent, and then no less than 2 principals, 3 district-level administrators, and 2 persons from the community not employed by the district. The petitioner will be notified, and they're allowed to make a presentation to the district media review committee. The district media review committee will read and examine the material in its entirety. If there are professional reviews, they will be given to each of the district review committee members.
You'll notice the similarity between.
Yeah, it
the
just sort of
school-based
follows
and
the same
district.
process. The district media review committee is a public meeting, but no student identifying information can be made public without the parent or guardian consent.
And for the record,
Yes, sir.
I interpret legally no student identifying information, meaning also the parent's name.
That makes sense, yes. Mhm.
Because that's what you, otherwise
Sure.
you're
Otherwise, you
identifying a
know.
student.
Right. And then the standards used by the school library media committee will apply to the district media review committee, but will be expanded to include concerns and issues related to all district schools. District review committee, district media review committee will issue a written decision to the director of the Media and Instructional Technology Department within 30 days of the date of that meeting. And then the decision of that committee will be mailed to the petitioner via certified mail with a receipt requested and reported to the superintendent and the school board at the next available school board agenda.
It sounds like a comprehensive process.
It really is.
That's people inside the community, outside, the district superintendent, there's definitely a lot of levels.
So it even has one more step now
Yep.
that if.
If the
that
petitioner
committee-
still does not agree with the decision of the District Media Review Committee, they can file an appeal with the Director of the Media and Instructional Technology Department within 10 days, and then they can appeal directly to the school board, who will make a final determination at the next available school board meeting.
If you want to delete those steps, I could accept that.
Which would probably mean you guys would have to really check those books out.
So it really, the school, and it basically comes down to school meets. If the petitioner agrees, it stops there. If they don't agree, it goes to the district. If they agree, it stops there. If they don't agree, it goes to the school board. If the school board makes a decision that when the school board makes a decision, that decision is binding for all schools in the district.
And that's an issue too, when they come straight to us, they're kind of skipping out the entire process. It's like when I have expulsion hearings, it's supposed to be held at the local level first, and then they appeal to us. If they come to us, who do we appeal to? You know what I mean?
Correct.
We're kind of defeating the whole entire way that the system's supposed to work.
That's
why I
not really
think
true, though. They get suspended at school, recommended for expulsion, then it comes to us, and then they appeal elsewhere.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, but they don't come to us and say, oh, I got in trouble, and make the case to us. They make the case at the local level first, and the principal makes that recommendation for it to bubble up.
But they don't really make the case. They don't have an opportunity. There's no due process there.
Perfect example, I was on the dais when one person tried to do that. Before I had the expulsion hearing, I had to remove myself because I'm not supposed to hear the witness or the testimony in evidence ahead of time. I'm supposed to have an impartial, fair look at what I'm looking at. I shouldn't be predetermined to make a decision.
So-
And that's why I had to remove myself from the room and allow the process.
Why
to work.
wouldn't, if something happened at one school and they made a determination, why wouldn't it be district-wide?
Your populations are different at each of the schools.
Yeah, but how
And their
much
interest-
so
and
are
their
kids
interest
different at
levels and so
one-
forth. It can be. I mean, honest to goodness, when you look at our variety of schools. But.
I mean, what are the two most varied or two most different schools
And
that
it would be
wouldn't?
difficult to judge for every single parent, as was being pointed out a while ago, that certain student, because there are some of these books that may help that child really deal with a problem that they have, or it may bring something to their attention. The one thing I do want to say to you guys, the purpose of this today is to get this to your attention. Start that conversation with us. I know a couple of you have called and asked some questions from our department, because we're open door over there. Any day you want to come, and talk to us, we're going to help, because our whole purpose is to get books in the kids' hands.
I would tell you, if it's deemed appropriate to remove a book, then I think I would check, I would have a justification for why it's not being removed from all the schools that have been identified.
Besides
And document
preserving the
that.
process.
Because if you don't do that, you open all those principals,
Then have to
the
go through their
administration,
review process.
everybody to an attack,
Yep.
and particularly the superintendent. Well, it wasn't good at Harmony. Why did you let it stay at Celebration? And I recognize there are differences, but I think somebody's got to consciously go, should this be binding on everything? Because arguably, if the board turned and it got appealed all the way up and removed it, it's binding on all schools. So if you're removing it from one school, I think you got to really think why it's not going out of the other schools.
And I think a perfect example is that a school like OXA is going to be very different than a school like Liberty or Celebration or Gateway,
And guess
like-
what? Having lived for the last year and a half dealing with OXA, there is a large group of people that take great exception on certain issues that OXA should be any different. I'm not here to argue one way or the other.
I think it's every school.
Right,
and
I think you
agree
got to
with
have the
current
process. There's got to be an evaluation somewhere. If the
Sure.
recommendation is to remove it from School X, should it be removed from all the other middle schools or all the other, whatever you decide, but somebody's got to
Is
consciously
that not
decide
what
that.
the appeal to the board is?
Yeah, but they may not
Why?
appeal to the
It
board.
may not get that
Wait,
far.
I understand what you're saying, it may not get that far, however, I'm.
The purpose.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Thank you. What I'm saying is, not all parents have the same complaint, and I keep going back to that, because we keep talking about parental rights. Great, all parents, not just some parents. I'm an OXA parent, and I can tell you that I may not have an issue with the book that some other parent has, and I don't want that other parent telling me telling me what I need to bring to my home. Can we flip it then? When we're thinking about these things, can we flip it in the inverse and see what happens when you tell parents who may not have an issue with this, what to do or what their child has access to?
Let me say, if I'm in
This is a good
Harmony,
conversation.
if
This is a
I'm in
helpful
Harmony
conversation,
and I protest the book, challenge a book, and the committee decides it should be removed, I think it is appropriate that somebody evaluate, should that decision be made for other schools or not? And simply to go, we're going to leave it there, opens up the criticism of, you removed it here and you ignored it everywhere
But not
else.
if we have the process that clearly states that the only way that it's removed from every school is if it's appealed to the school board. That's what the process says.
But that's where we're here, we could change that process, that's why we're
I
having
don't
this
want to change the
conversation now.
process.
Now, here's one
So-
reason why I kind of agree with that logic, and I think that this is a healthy conversation. That's what I was saying before, the standard shouldn't be topic-based. So like we said, OXA may order more music books, you know what I mean, than whatever. But OXA shouldn't be ordering books that are sexually inappropriate, or whatever the standard is the same standard for all the schools. There's no standard for OXA that's different than a standard whatever. That's how come when
That's
Mr. Bass
true.
brought up the conversation, that's why I interrupted him. I wasn't trying to be argumentative with you, Mr. Bass, and you went out. But when he says, I don't like the topic of politics isn't a part of the standard. It's not like, okay, do I like communism or liberalism? So maybe there are more communists in OXA, maybe there's more liberals in there. It doesn't matter. That shouldn't be the standard. The standard should be of whether or not something is extremely graphic in nature, That's why I'm so focused on the standard. All this other
Here's
stuff
what
was
Frank
window
is,
dressing.
here's the reason that Frank was saying, is if we were to get sued because we had genderqueer in one book, and then you don't take it out of one school because this school has a different population, you're going to get a lawsuit at every single individual school when you could just resolve the problem. So the problem is the liability that and it's not the case obviously here,
No,
but
no,
I'm
no,
just saying, why are we going to not unresolve, we're going to fail to resolve a liability that we've created by not solving the problem? The only reason that we would do it is to preserve the book intentionally against the will of the process, right?
The
Here's
book
all I'm
was
saying
not
is
removed.
if,
How are we violating the
no, you're not,
process?
if it's not removed. If the committee decides to remove the
If
book
they
at
decide to.
School X, I think it incumbent on somebody, whoever the superintendent, to say, should this be removed from the remaining schools or not? And if not, here's the justification. And you can have the committee say, we think it should be removed from all schools, and here's why.
Or can the
we
process
don't
come to
think
the
it
school
should
board?
be.
Or can that come to the school
It
board?
can come to the
Let's say,
school
for
board,
instance,
too.
Oxa, I don't want to beat up Oxa, let's use
what I-
another school.
what I want-
Central Avenue Elementary School, for instance, their committee, they went through the process, they filled it out. It was determined by the committee that that book isn't appropriate, right? As a school board, I kind of want to know that a book got removed from me anyway. I don't want it to go through the grapevine. To be honest with you, we're talking about formal processes. Maybe ones that are officially deemed not appropriate by the committee, that goes to the school board on its agenda. And then we can then, right, and that way it keeps Terry's,
Well,
legit
if they
concern
vote to
that only
remove
the
it and
school
it's
board-
settled, the board doesn't need to act. You're just informed
It's
this
just
got
the
We're
removed.
appeal
informed, but we can
process.
make that determination whether or not we want to make it binding to all the other schools.
I don't love that.
And that way it's
for
not
a lot of
on-
reasons.
That way it's not on the individual
A
school.
media specialist, PLC, that meets monthly, as long as there's not other things going on. And that would probably be a conversation, is if there is a book that's challenged, and challenged and decided to go. So there would be further conversation. And I will tell you, the last part I'm going to hit is, I've worked at 5 different schools in this district, and each culture's been different, okay? It's been different. Kids are kids, I agree with you on that, and there's certain things that we want to provide to all kids, but just some of the choices, and that's where I think you were going with this a moment ago, was the fact that they're going to have different choices of what kind of things they want to read.
But no, the standards are the same for everybody.
But the
are.
standards should be the same,
And
though.
if you
I'm hitting
violate the standards, you're removed.
Correct.
And if you're saying it violates the standard, that's the standard for the whole district. We don't say there's the standard for Oxford, here's the standard for this.
Couple of slides.
So arguably, if it's removed,
Technically,
somebody's going to have to justify why it's not getting removed from every school, because what you're
Yes.
saying is, it violated
Good,
the
yeah.
It violated the policy.
Isn't part
Madam
of,
Chair?
isn't
Madam
Dr.
Chair?
Pace? Yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I'm
Dr.
sorry for
Pace.
interrupting, but if I could just make a couple of points that I think have been made but maybe lost in the nature of the discussion. First of all, as Michelle and Scott and Peter shared with you, the process starts with that professional media specialist, which we have been very blessed that the board has continued to support. When quite frankly, a lot of other districts cut them back in 2007, 2008, when budgets were so very tight. That professional media specialist has the authority and the responsibility to decide if a book doesn't meet the culture of their school. That's not banning books. That's the media specialist exercising their professional training and experience. So that's where the process starts. No form required. That conversation with the media specialist at the school level. Then, if that doesn't satisfy the community member or the parent's concern, that's when you start talking about the formal book protest process, which is currently in board policy. Now, we all know that as a result of the new legislation, House Bill 1457, we're going to have to relook at that policy, and there's some other things that we have to formalize. So this conversation is very productive and informative for all of us. We've heard that we need to take into account those standards that are set in that statute. That is the standard. It's the state standard. It's the district standard. We must follow it at all of our schools. And then we'll come back to you with some revisions for this process that I think will meet the concerns of everybody so that we're not making decisions for every child unless it's absolutely appropriate and against the district and state standard. I felt like that was important to come back to. And again, the conversation is productive. It's just a very fine balancing act, but in the end, the law is the law. And as
Dr.
Michelle
Pace.
said, she's been a leader in this process throughout the state for a long time.
Dr. Pay, what's your opinion as a superintendent? You know, I value your opinion as well. Like, let's say it goes through the process and the book from the committee was determined not to be appropriate for that school. Do you think that should be binding upon all the schools, or is it just that one specific school that the book was found in?
I'd like to talk to the team and do a little bit more research on that particular piece, but I do want the board and everyone to know that not only will we be reporting to the board any books that are challenged and removed, we will have to annually report any book challenges and any book removals to the state as a part of our certification of instruction process. That's included in the legislation. So it's not something that's going to be under wraps or hidden or anything like that. Now, I'm not talking about if the media specialist looks at a book and says, whoa, I don't think that's necessarily appropriate for our culture. I'm going to take it out of circulation in my media center, which is what happened with genderqueer. But if it goes through a formal process, that has to be reported to the state. So of course, we would also naturally report that to the board.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Pace, I think at this time, before we put the onus on the community at large, can't we just ask all of our district personnel to please take a thorough look through all of your things to ensure that we have appropriate books at this time? Like, that would make sense to do that, right, as an organization, prior to putting the challenge to the community to come and say, and that way there's no issue, right? It's like, really, because to me, in my opinion, when somebody came the very first night and read an excerpt from the book, that's exactly what that was, a call to check yourself, police yourself up, fix whatever we're missing, and don't let it become a issue like it's become.
And Mr. Arguello, what I would say respectfully is that that's already been done. I sent out information through our principals to our school, our English teachers, our reading teachers to check their classroom libraries. And Michelle, as she's already shared with you and the rest of the board today, is working with our media specialists now on what that reading process needs to look like, particularly with the new legislation and the clarity kind of around standards with that. So we are already doing that, sir, and I appreciate your feedback on that.
And as Dr. Pace is saying, it's been raised to the attention all across the country. It's not just Osceola County School District. And so we are doing our due diligence the best that we can at this point, and we are meeting with them. And we are looking, like Dr. Pace says, she's provided information to you all about those 4 books, and we are looking at that. And the next step of the PowerPoint that she has, it does have links to all the things that were in the presentation as well, just so you know, the posted procedures, checklist of media advisory and so forth. So I want you to know that.
I want to say one thing. As I'm getting older, as you get farther away from the mountain, you can see the mountain a little bit clearer, and as I'm getting older, I remember a time in the past when it was a we society, and now, but it seems like, it's us versus them. I've never seen such a division, and so your job is going to be extremely difficult from this point forward, because as I'm browsing through the books, there's a lot of books in here that they wouldn't fall under the umbrella that we've been talking about, sexual content, because that pretty much can be black and white. We can go through there and say, yeah, that's not appropriate. But then when you start drifting over into the social component, because I'm just going to pick up this, we mentioned Oxford, so I picked out an art book, The Art of Protest. And it says, art forms that can be used as a response to injustice. Scattered throughout the book are suggestions for how young people on how they can use art to rally against oppressive forces. Now, that to me is, I haven't read the book, but is it taking the kids and steering them in a direction that again, is pushing further division in our society? So I guess I live in Andy Griffith world, so I apologize for that. I wish we could all get along better like that.
Yes, I take your point clear, because one of the things is it's really hard to recommend a movie if you've never seen the movie.
Right.
Hard to recommend or not recommend a book sometimes if you haven't read the book.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. And that's how you really get a better understanding. I have a hard time sometimes myself in life when I look at a review about something, and then I go and I see it, and I'm like, oh my God, that was the best movie I ever seen in my life. But this review, Rotten Tomato, whatever they call it, they give it a low rating. So it's one of those things too.
But I think that as a district, we can say philosophically you know what, we're going to do comedies, or we're going to do dramas, or we're going to do this, right? But we're not going to do scary movies, or we're not going to do pornography, right? Like, just in general. And that's, like Mr. Bass said, there's black and white. Okay, so so here's the thing. You can make even a wide grasping statement that says, we're not going to do pornography. To me, that's not a slippery slope. I wouldn't want my child reading pornography in schools. If they're going to get pornography, let them get it elsewhere instead of the public money. It's not our task, especially when we're not doing a great, when I say great, I mean it, in reading. So obviously, the stuff that we're getting, and if they're not being checked out, then, Dog Man's certainly not getting our kids to the next level in terms of reading, right? So, we need,
You're getting a kid's interest to read is one of the things I know that was one of the things Mr. Melendez, he knew that book right away. So that means that
Well, me too, my daughter has
somebody's reading
Dessert
them.
first instead of dinner.
Yeah, 'cause you gotta have pleasure reading as well.
the problem is, we're not eating dinner here very well,
Yeah.
right?
Well-
So, I'm just going to state.
You're fine, and
Okay, so,
everybody has that opinion.
well, yeah, because my opinion is just based on what the results are. So if our results are great, let's say this, if all of our schools were A and our results here were through the roof, I wouldn't care what books you're putting in. I'd be saying, man, I would probably not read that book myself, but I'm not going to even bother you, right? But if we're not, then I am, right? And especially when there's people complaining, and this is a slippery slope. This is political, because if you read through this, I think everybody knows where I stand on things, right? But if I read through this is certainly, it's very clear that the majority of, even when you read the biographies of the people who are contributing to this, right? They're members of organizations. This is political. Half of this stuff is political. Like, that's what they put in their credentialing, right? Is that I'm an activist for this cause and for this cause and for this cause. So then it makes sense that they're going to be reviewing these books well, and it would make sense that they would recommend to you that you guys should buy books from a particular source or with a particular agenda.
And that's why we have a variety of them. You're going to see we have a long list, because we don't take the one opinion, and that's what I was saying
Yeah,
about a movie
absolutely.
review. I don't pay just attention to the Rotten Tomato one. I sometimes will look at this other one to make that opinion. And when I go and see the movie, that's when I actually form my opinion, and I'm not.
And worst case scenario, if it gets disputed, we're forced to read it. So the opinion is just used more, if I interpret your presentation wrong, is more on the initial purchase. When you initially purchase it, they're buying 500 books at a trench. The librarian can have time to read 500 books to buy books that are
Sure.
due in
And
30
it's in-
days.
it's
You know
in
what I mean?
state statute.
It's when something is being challenged and they're saying, wait, I think there's something wrong, is when they'll go through the entire process.
The new state law says that we are required to use peer-reviewed, so House Bill 1467 says that require consultation of reputable, professionally recognized reviewing periodicals to make purchases.
And I don't think this is going to
Filled out,
happen.
too, to challenge under the law. Buried in there, I
It's
believe.
probably buried
One
in there
thing I'll say
somewhere.
also, Mr. Kuppenberger, I don't think the state's going to tell us which one of these to use to review our books. They're preparing their presentation to us. That'd be nice if they could give some additional
they're-
ideas. Just like our instructional materials, they recommend this company, but they're not going to tell us. So that's why we're
There's
using
probably going to be a lot of
the ones we select.
refinement to these statutes.
And a lot of these
Yeah.
organizations are being a little more careful.
But when they find a book that they think should have been removed, they'll punish us.
Well, and it's required, absolutely.
That's
And we'll-
exactly what I was just saying.
It is required, as Dr. Pace
I
referred
said,
to.
and when the state thinks a book should have been removed and it wasn't removed, they'll punish us, because that's the way they
They're
treat it.
doing that
Right.
anyway, but I do.
I think you have to be
we're
careful
beating a
here
dead
and let
horse.
the
I think
process
everybody
work.
understands
That's
the
right.
point, right? But it seems like we're not open to letting ideas in. You may not like it, but we can't just start saying, I don't like this book because it's political.
I said, let the process work, it'll work.
It'll work,
Let the
absolutely.
community, let the administrators and the librarians do their part. I think very few will burble up. As a lawyer, given my past experience, and if they do, the community will be engaged. And then ultimately, if there's an issue, it'll come to the board. But I don't think we're going to have some wholesale craziness going on.
Yeah, and if there's going to be any revisions of the standards of what we're using as guidelines, that's what I want to.
You have to approve it.
You know, at that point, like, what is determined to be acceptable, not acceptable, that's what I really care about.
Okay.
You know,
And
at
that's
the end of
where-
the day, I don't care about every single
The
book.
board has to approve that.
And that's where Dr. Pace is talking about.
No changes unless you,
In the House bill, it says that it's going to be January, whatever, is when we're going to get the actual presentation from them. So hopefully, they have the guidelines before that. And Michelle and I talked before this presentation, we're giving you what we got to the best knowledge of what we have and what we have done and what they've tried to repeat. But who knows, it may have a little adjustment or twist to it,
I
right?
think I sent them to, I know I sent it to the superintendent. We asked for some guidance as the school board attorneys. What they did literally was restate the law.
Yep. It came out on
That's it.
June 3rd from
Just
Jacob
restated,
Alina.
there was no guidance. it was
Literally
just
says it.
restating the
It did not change, you're right, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Quick
It was
question.
exactly the same.
Some of the electronic resources we're using are self-policing, correct? So some of them have already changed some things that said young.
Yes, it's
from eighth
interesting.
grade to young adult, or
Yes.
young adult to some other
Yes.
category.
It
So
is
that
interesting.
happening.
It has happened. So when we go to purchase books, we'll do it online through like different companies. And so first, at one point, they recommended a book for young adults. And then the next time we went in, they recommended the book for adult. So they're changing their rules, which is hurting us because we're making our book choices based on their recommendations, and then they're changing their recommendations. So it does cause us to do more work and require us to do more research into the books that we're purchasing, and that's okay, we want to do that. But sometimes that has been a situation where things have fallen through the cracks.
I wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are doing our due diligence, and, it's causing the media specialists to work even harder, but that's okay. They're here for it, and they want to make sure that they are providing the best books that they can and the most age-appropriate books that they can to our students.
I would say this, just having been in your position similar, we're under great scrutiny, I wouldn't take this personally, because this is not about where you guys are at or what you guys are process using, or this is really about everyone is feeling like they're arriving to the point at the same time. There's a lot of voices, right, on either side of a situation. There's going to be a lot of input. There's a lot of passion, and there's, so this isn't, and none of the media specialists at the school sites should feel like this is an attack on them. People are feeling like, I think that the community that I can speak on behalf of, feel duped by a process where we weren't paying attention, right? All of a sudden, because of COVID, a lot more people are paying attention to the specifics, and you're finding out, I don't like that, right? And so I'm going to react to it, and people are reacting to it. And so I would caution you guys to not take it as like this is a reflection on you guys or your job or the job that you've done, because no one, if you were there, I don't think there's a single person in the community, regardless of how they feel that you should have read every single book and that you should be able to tell me the call number for every single book, right? That's not the expectation. The expectation is, now that we know, let's have an actual, open, and honest dialogue. And even if that's negative, it's not a reflection on you guys. It's a reflection of the path that we need to move forward on, right, together.
And that is the goal, is to continue to get better every year. When we pulled media specialists together, they work so hard, and that's all we talk about. And that's why they have a PLC, is they're always talking about that. When we had the committee meeting, one of the things that they talked about is the age appropriateness, and that's one of the things too. It's not necessarily getting rid of a book, as we were talking about, Ms. Castillo, just like pulling this book. And that's where Michelle hit the nail on the head earlier in the presentation, is some of these books, it's hard to decide if it's middle school or only high school. Honest to goodness, because you've got eighth graders who are at high maturity level academically and reading level. So those are the areas that are going to be tough for our media specialists, as well as that. It's not just, the goal is not, and I think I've heard you all say this, it's not to just ban a book and get rid of it. It's just to get it in the appropriate spots. And that's really what our goal is going to be, to get better at, is to get the books in those spots.
And that's not a high bar, right? That's not something that we should be fighting over. Right?
It's not, and that's why we set aside and tried to make those levels, like Mr. Melendez was saying he likes that slide, and we're working on that. And also, the other point I want to make is a book that was written in 2000 might not have been offensive then, but it may be offensive now.
Right.
So we're up against that. That's part of the reason we weed those books, is because they could become that.
I know
So
old
we
Disney
try to follow
cartoons.
that guideline. When Michelle and I are, when money's being released to the schools, also, we look at their student number. This isn't about whether the book's acceptable or not. I'm not talking about releasing the money. We look at their age of their collection, what the average is, and we'll go in and start helping weed some of it to get that age where it should be more appropriate. And some principals get offended when we send out our team to come help the media specialists do that, but they've been so busy, so we just help them reduce and make that age a little more current. Some of our media specialists, it's a normal thing every quarter, right, that they'll go through and they'll start to weed some, because we want to get to that appropriate age, and then that'll also help reduce some of those inappropriate topics.
Yeah, this is just not a controversy that we want to be involved in my opinion. I think that it's one that we'll lose. Statutes are going to change, things are going to become more stringent, people are going to be paying attention more, and we're inviting more problems and more controversy than we would want by not being very cautious with our approach to it.
And that's why we just ask that we follow a procedure. It'll make it a whole lot easier for us to manage it too. If it's just an onslaught of everybody coming in and saying, I'm not happy with this book today, I'm not happy, we just say, help us out a little bit.
They've got to give us, they come in and say, I'm not happy with this book. They've got to identify whether they're not happy with it.
Correct.
Otherwise, it puts the burden on staff to read the book and figure out. And that person could turn around and go, well, you didn't read the right section the way I read it. I mean, you've got to get somebody to explain it.
Even a parent or a person that said to me out in the public, because, people sometimes know what I do, and they'll catch me in the public and they'll say something to me, and they're like, was that one page in the book or is that in the whole book? And then they ask me, well, I hadn't read that whole book yet, okay, honest to goodness. But then when I did confer with people, they found out that, that stuff that may be read in something, maybe establishing the character of this one person in the book to let you know that he's not a good dude, or a good person. So reading it is what makes a difference for me.
I got asked by
so I
a
can
school
know.
board attorney in the state recently, was having a book of Confederate generals in a predominantly all-black school, what would I do? And I said, I think I would be sensitive and remove it. I don't fathom, you have it in other schools, but you got a ton of people in that school upset with it. And it basically was a book praising the generals. So, I mean, you got stuff, it's real easy on the pornography, we can all agree everything. There's going to be these gray areas where you got to use your judgment, and the process you're setting up takes a lot of bright people all the way through it to evaluate it.
Michelle, since the form was so simple, it is a simple form, Scott was just holding it up just now, was that form filled out for any of the books that have been read? So maybe it behooves us to better educate the parents and the people that the process is simple if they just fill out the form when they do find out, rather than.
I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Pace, but I believe every school principal was directed to have a copy of that available at their front desk at any time.
Well, I know it's there, but I just don't know that most parents know what the
Correct.
true process is, but.
We actually had feedback from our curriculum review committee board members, and they suggested that we make the forms readily available. So there are some copies at the front desk there in the lobby, and we've asked other schools to keep them at their front desk as well. And certainly we will continue to communicate and have a significant communication push at the beginning of the school year about the parental choice options for opting their students in or out or partially accessing the media center. As a final clarifying point, I just wanted to make sure, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that our media specialists purchase any books that are identified for adult use. It's only young adult or below in terms of age group, in terms of how they are rated and reviewed. And also, Michelle made the point, but I want to reiterate it. We are not going to order any additional books until we receive the training and guidelines from DOE related to this bill, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page and ready to follow those statutes.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you.
Madam Chair, for the purpose of board meetings, if a parent comes to raise an issue about a book, it's my recommendation to the chair and the board to ask that parent, have you implemented the process we have? And if they haven't, say then it would be inappropriate for us to hear this tonight, because we ultimately are going to be deciding the issue. And please get with Mr. Allen, and he'll advise you how to go through or whoever you pick. But I think that will further the public hearing. There is a process, and here's how you go through it.
and everybody sees it. And like what
I would just
Chairwoman
make a
said,
comment.
and actually have the form there
I would not tell
present
them
where
that they
can
can't
pick
do
it
their
up.
3 minutes.
They can do
No,
the 3
they can do
minutes,
their
but
3
it's
minutes,
not a
but I would tell them you're not
formal
going to get any
But I
decision
feel like
from us.
we've been
We're
saying
referring
that
it.
for 6 months.
Right.
And yet we have no protest. So how much easier can we make it? I mean, the point has been made already 17 times. I feel like we all know where we stand on that. The forms are available up there. Maybe we should direct them to the form here instead, but
I think you have the legal right to say, we have learned that we are the final arbiters if there's a dispute, and we're not going to hear it at this time. You need to go through the process. And I think you can legally take away their 3 minutes and say, you can talk to us about anything else. Like a parent coming to talk about
I mean, I had to
the
remove it.
expulsion, and I said, you got to step out, you're going to hear this case.
I understand what you're saying, but
You're just saying that option's available, whether or not you
Yeah.
exercise it, but.
Yeah, because what if that book, what if, now, I'm not saying that the parent would do this, but it could. There's a list that's out there of inappropriate books, and if they get their hand on one, but it's not in our system, and they come here, as soon as someone speaks at the dais, it's assumed accurate because I've got this book. What if it wasn't in our library system? What if we never had it? Now it's out there amongst everybody to be talking
well,
about
that,
it.
you
So-
make a good point. You make a good point.
No, no, no.
That they've mentioned.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying.
No,
but
it didn't
then-
happen once, because one
Yeah.
lady goes, oh, I got a list of 60,000 books.
80.
Or 80,000 books. Mr. Crum said, hey, give me the list. Well, I'm not going to give you the list. And so she was out
The
here.
list is available online. I got it if you need it.
But the point is, there was somebody that
That's how
came
we got
with
it.
the list and didn't, all of 80,000 weren't in our libraries.
Okay, I will take that into consideration. You do make a good point about, making it seem like it is in the library. Does anybody have anything else to add to the conversation? I feel like this was
you
really
very
informative,
much.
honestly.
Really
Thank you
appreciate
so
that.
much for that.
Great job.
Okay, so we can go ahead and adjourn the workshop, and I guess we'll reconvene at 5:30?
Yes.
Thank you. Not I guess, I know we will.
I think the most important thing
Thanks.